Okay. Okay, so thank you very much. It's a great pleasure, and all the colleagues and keynote speakers, they have given us very enriching contributions. My dissertation argues that the great fascination of William Blake's philosophy and works deeply influenced highly prominent figures of contemporary pop culture, from Aldous Huxley to Jim Morrison, from Bob Dylan to Alan Moore, Allen Ginsberg, Patti Smith, Crowley, the U2. For all of them, William Blake has been a huge source of inspiration. Personally, I believe that it's necessary to discard a certain twisting of his message, by which Blake may seem as some sort of satanist prophet by shining light on a deeper philosophical awareness of his poetical vision. You know, this topic could take like 15 hours, so I will try to shrink it to 15 minutes. So I will jump here and there, and just to shine some few highlights of my presentation. Firstly, I would like to show how Aleister Crowley's misinterpretations led to a general misunderstanding of Blake's works, especially in the rock culture, because Blake's works and thoughts are too complex to be reduced to an occultist stereotype. Subsequently, I would like to underline the difference between the shallow fascination of Blake's figure that we can meet in Jim Morrison lyrics, and the constant reference to his poetry found in Bob Dylan songs, for example, Gates of Eden, Every Grain of Sand, and Alan Moore's work, as in the previous speech. Those are just examples of two ways of approaching the figure of William Blake. So on one side, we can find a series of just skin-deep quotes, for example, the album by the U2, Song of Experience, and also Song of Innocence, that they are not necessarily related to Blake's work. Whereas, on the other hand, we can find a much more interesting legacy of his cultural research, as in Aldous Huxley and William Butler Yeats. The aim of my dissertation is to show how, in both ways, William Blake is one of the most influential figures of modern Western culture. Now, first and foremost, I would like to call attention to an enlightening paradox in the reception of Blake's work. He was undoubtedly ahead of his time. For this reason, he was despised during his lifetime and considered a genius and a prophet 2 centuries after his death. One of the most inspired geniuses in the history of art was always considered a sort of a madcap by his contemporaries due his eccentricities. Wordsworth's definition is well known. There was no doubt that this poor man was mad, but there is something in the madness of this man which interests me more than the sanity of Lord Byron and Walter Scott. Gilbert Keith Chesterton, with his endearing penchant for paradoxes, came to say, "I say he was mad because his visions were true." Even a mind immersed in deep spiritual contemplation like T.S. Eliot did not fully understand Blake. I will summarize this quote. Blake was endowed with a capacity for considerable understanding of human nature, with a remarkable and original sense of language and the music of language, and a gift of hallucinated vision. Had this been controlled by respect for impersonal reason, for common sense, for the objectivity of science, it would have been better for him. So Eliot say, what his genius lacked was a framework of accepted and traditional ideas which have prevented him from indulging in a philosophy of his own. And he said, confusion of thought, emotion, and vision is what we find in such a work as Also Sprach Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. It is eminently not a latent virtue. That's why Dante is a classic, says Eliot, and Blake only a poet of genius. I'm sorry to disagree with my beloved T.S. Eliot, but indeed, one of Blake's poetic virtues is precisely the ability to enclose the abysmal depth of a initiatory wisdom in a few stanzas. Let's take Jerusalem, a poetic piece that, set to music, as we know, by Hubert Parry is sung in England also before rugby matches as a sort of alternative national anthem or a popular national anthem. So it's the opposite of an incomprehensible occult poet. And in a way, we can say that Blake pursued the aurea mediocritas, the golden balance, which the author of The Waste Land complained he lacked, in finding harmony in contrasts, just like Nietzsche, with whom he was compared not only in this instance. Henry Miller, a very distant figure for William Blake, noticed that Blake and Nietzsche reign like dazzling twin stars. Their message is still so new that we think of them in terms of insanity. Nietzsche rearranges all existence values. Blake fashions a new cosmogony. Rimbaud is close to both in many ways. The link between Blake and Rimbaud could be explored in another speech, and it's interesting how both of them are like the patron saints of Bob Dylan, but we will talk about this later. William Butler Yeats' gaze is much more aware and respectful. He wrote several beautiful, insightful pages on Blake, who amidst his pages full of admiration for Blake wrote, "When one reads Blake, it is as though the spray of an inexhaustible fountain of beauty was blown into our faces." But the whirlwind dance of Blake's critical reception certainly does not end here. Between admiration and perplexity, veneration and plagiarism. As is well known, Aldous Huxley's 1954 essay on his first experiences with mescaline is titled The Doors of Perception, as a tribute to one of the best-known lines taken from Blake's Proverbs of Hell. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything will appear to man as it is, infinite. By Huxley's account, his psychedelic research had a mystical, in brackets, fully Blakean intent. Not surprisingly, the essay ends with a reference to the well-known vision which induced Saint Thomas Aquinas to interrupt the writing of his Summa Theologiae. The great doctor of the church revealed to his confessor, "All that I've written seems to me so much straw after the things that have been revealed to me." A real triumph of mystical experience over theological speculation. The title of the book, and therefore indirectly Blake, will inspire Jim Morrison to call his famous rock band The Doors. Here continues the misunderstanding of Blake as a prophet for a sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. This is a few lines from a famous song by The Doors, who evidently quotes Auguries of Innocence by Blake. Morrison's dazzling and self-destructive parable precisely shows the tragic outcome of a superficial misunderstanding and unconscious practical application of some crucial philosophical intuitions. Let's cast our minds to the Nietzschean Dionysian archetype, or Arthur Rimbaud's systematic deregulation of the senses, or Blake's beautiful proverb, "The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom." This is the point, according to me, of misunderstanding that allowed a dangerous figure like Crowley to twist Blake's poetry into a sort of Luciferian mambo-jumbo. If in the history of rock, Crowley influence dominated, especially in England, bringing, for example, David Bowie, obsessed with occult themes, to the brink of madness in 1975, 1976, not to mention the, in brackets, of course, curse that marked Led Zeppelin's career of tragic events. Despite this, William Blake would also inspire wiser and more insightful tributes, from Patti Smith's naive but authentic enthusiasm to the great influence on the visions of Bob Dylan, explicitly stated in his last album, and also Nick Cave, who indicated Blake as one of his poets of reference. We could also talk, for example, about the beautiful ending of the masterpiece of the early Genesis, Gabriel era Genesis, Supper's Ready. The last verse, it's evidently full of Blakean influences, but the song lasts 22 minutes, so I put my attention on shortest songs. Perhaps the more revealing of the comparison with Blake is the one with the most mystical of songwriters, Bob Dylan. We all know him, Nobel Prize winner. Against his will, is considered the voice of his generation. The dualism between innocence and experience, for Blake, these are the two poles of human knowledge, of human experience. This dualism is present in Dylan as a hidden thread running through this entire work. The visions of the London poet, supreme Gnostic scholar of the West, reverberate powerfully at the heights of Dylanesque poetry, such as Chimes of Freedom and Gates of Eden. Blake is the source of inspiration, not even a hidden one, for one of the highlights of the Dylanian works, Every Grain of Sand. Evidently, it refers to the Blakean Agreeus of Innocence, to see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a white flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. These are the famous Blake's verse, in the first lines of Agreeus of Innocence. The song I Contain Multitudes from his latest album, Rough and Rowdy Ways by Bob Dylan, which echoes, of course, Walt Whitman's most famous line, and it's a sort of poetic manifesto for Geminian psychology. Dylan explicitly puts his cards on the table, proclaiming, I sing the song of experience like William Blake. Yet, returning to the theme of the fight with one's demon, the inner twin, the shadow, the doppelganger, Dylan seems to embody the archetype of the sage a la Blake, precisely in the understanding that the only way to overcome one's limit is to accept chaos. As he said in a famous statement, of course, we think about the Jungian idea of shadow. Knowing oneself is perhaps the true philosopher's stone. After all, in one of his famous songs, Dylan recalled how to be forever young, one must have strong foundation for when the winds of change shifts. And the return to innocence after having crossed the ocean of illusions of experience is the destiny of the sage. On a similar note, we cannot avoid mentioning Patti Smith with her several and explicit homages. Speaking about her song In My Blaken Year, she said, I've studied Blake the man, and what I learned was that this man was a man who had visions as a child, who was ridiculed and even beaten for having these visions. But he maintained those visions his whole life, wherever they came from, whether he animated them from within or they were from God. William Blake held on to his vision. He never got a break in his life. His work never sold. He lived in poverty. When he spoke out, he nearly lost his life. And in 2007, to celebrate the 250th anniversary of Blake's birth, Smith edited a selection of his verses simply titled Poems, stating, he, William Blake, is a messenger and a god himself, deliverer, receptacle, and font. To take on Blake is not to be alone. Walk with him. William Blake writes all is holy. That includes the book you are holding and the hands that holds it. She is also referring here to an Allen Ginsberg poem, the one who actually introduced Blake as a source of inspiration for American counterculture. Last but not least, we already listened a contribution about his work from hell. I would like to emphasize the importance of Alan Moore's tribute to Blake. Moore seems to have fully recognized the greatness and the prophetic depth of Blake. As we already seen in Moore's From Hell, Blake is not only present as a character depicted in the story, but much more, he deeply inspires the whole atmosphere of the story, a hallucinatory journey of prophetic and infernal visions, occult revelations, impossible and desperate catharsis and redemptions. Blake is one of Moore's tutelarist deities, and the English writer will pay homage to him as well as in V for Vendetta. in the title and the structure of a famous chapter in his comic book series Watchmen, called Fearful Symmetry, or Symmetry, as Blake may pronunciate, using it as a rhyme, Symmetry. He yet again pays homage to Blake with the title of his fluvial novel Jerusalem, which shares its name with the poetic fragment destined to become, as we know, the text of the famous song by Rupert Perry. But also, Blake's influence can be seen in cinema as well, in the fearful symmetry or symmetry of Stanley Kubrick's vision, in David Lynch's occult imagery, and the explicit homage by Jim Jarmusch in Dead Man, not to mention the most overt references in many movies. For example, the movie Red Dragon, that it's inspired by the famous Red Dragon by William Blake, but only on a surface level. The same considerations can be applied to music and poetry. We could have mentioned Lorena McKennitt, the Fags, the band The Fags of the 60s, or Bruce Dickinson, but time is short, so I have chosen just a few key figures. I recommend the beautiful rendition of the Song of Innocence by Victor Vertugni. I think they are very loyal to the original. And I would like to end my contribution with a quote from a spiritual Indian guru, because I think it's interesting to see how the Eastern philosophy values William Blake more than Dante or Michelangelo. And Shimada Jinir Maladevi referred to William Blake as a prophet and a seer. And I think this is very interesting. It shows the universal value of the message of William Blake. Thank you very much.